This is your tech news briefing for Friday, March 10th. I'm Zoe Thomas for the Wall Street Journal. The holy grail of energy transmission is a superconductor, something that transfers energy without giving away any in the form of heat. But most superconductors are wildly impractical because they typically only work under extreme cold or pressure. Researchers at the University of Rochester think they might have a solution, and this technology could eventually have a huge impact on how we consume energy. Here to talk through what they found and why it matters is our science reporter, Aylin Woodward. Hi, Aylin. Thanks for joining us again.
Hi, thanks so much for having me again.
So, Aylin, what's different about the conductors the research team in Rochester discovered?
Basically, ever since the first superconductor was discovered in 1911, researchers have been trying to discover materials that are capable of superconducting that don't need these extreme requisite conditions. And the way they go about trying to solve that conundrum is they try different recipes, different atomic recipes. In the case of this new breakthrough, the superconductor recipe in question, they took hydrogen, they added a little bit of nitrogen and a rare earth material called lutetium, and basically squeezed it and heated it to see what happens. And then once they had created this new material, they dialed back the pressure and they amped up the temperature to see if it could still be a superconductor, even when it wasn't really cold or wasn't under extreme pressure.
So this new material that they've discovered, it doesn't need to be super cooled, it doesn't need to be super pressurized, that's what you're telling us?
Correct. It does operate at room temperature, 69 degrees Fahrenheit. And then in terms of pressure, the caveat here is it works at a much lower pressure than other superconducting materials. It works at 145,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. We actually experience 15 pounds per square inch at sea level, so we're not quite at ambient pressure yet. But the special thing about getting the superconductor into this 145,000 pounds per square inch range is that there are techniques and instruments that engineers and material scientists can use to achieve those pressures without needing super expensive specialized equipment. So those pressures are used in chip manufacturing and synthesizing diamonds, for example. So the way an outside expert explained it to me is that this new discovery sort of brings the superconductor into a range where engineers can jump on it and make something commercially viable out of it.
So it would just be much cheaper to have energy conducted this way than through the conductive materials we use at the moment?
So the thing about the conductive materials we use at the moment is, as you mentioned, there's always a loss in the transfer and distribution as heat, typically. And the thing about superconductors is that you don't see that loss. It is perfect efficiency. But right now, the scales are sort of unbalanced because you have to maintain these extreme conditions that enable the superconducting material to work. So in the case of the superconducting magnets in an MRI machine, for example, they need liquid helium to cool down those magnets in order for them to work, in order for them to sort of yield that beneficial, lossless electric current transfer. And so in order to get those benefits, you have to then pay the piper. You have to facilitate those extreme conditions. And if we were able to swap in a superconductor that worked at room temperature or worked at pressures that were closer to ambient pressure, it would mean that these devices are cheaper to make and maintain. It would mean that we could shrink them down. So we could make, for example, maybe smaller MRI machines that were portable because you wouldn't need that bulky cooling apparatus to make the superconducting material happy.
Is this something that could, say, help in electrical devices that we use, maybe in our homes or in our everyday lives?
Absolutely. And I think that's really the application that maybe first comes to mind when you chat about superconductors is if you have them in your handheld devices, your phones and your laptops, they'll need less electricity to run. They won't lose that energy as heat. When you have your laptop in your lap and it overheats, like that won't happen if superconducting components are involved. And the same components could be incorporated into electric car batteries, for example, or electric planes even, one of the experts said. And then the two sort of lead scientists from this University of Rochester group, they told me that they think we'll have devices with superconducting components in them in the next 5 years.
Could this type of conductor make it easier to use renewable energy? Because storing that has always been a big hurdle.
We could source any kind of energy a lot easier, but I mean, people often talk about superconductivity as maybe being a key thing to leverage in the fight against climate change, because a superconducting grid could store solar or wind energy for an indefinite period of time and then transfer it over a large distance. For example, say you're in a place like Arizona or California or Florida where you get a lot of sun. So you have a solar grid and you collect a lot of this energy, but you can't get it to a place far away that doesn't get as much sun without a loss. Or, for example, you could bank up a lot of stored solar or wind energy and then just store it until you needed it in a superconducting grid, because of that idea that you can, this technology can help store energy for a perpetual period of time.
What steps do they have to take to get it out of the lab and into these commercial products?
They explained it to me as they need to get to a point where they can create this superconducting material, either this new one that they just announced, or they're continuously tweaking their recipes. They're trying to get closer to room temperature and zero pressure, like 0 pounds per square inch. And as they go about tweaking their methodology, they have to figure out how to make this material in bulk. One of the goals is creating like wire that's made out of this particular new type of superconducting material that can be distributed. They need to figure out how to make more of it more efficiently and cheaply. And that's probably the next step.
So it's all about more efficiency, more cheaply, and then eventually more energy.
Right. They explained it as like there's always a holy or holy grail. So.
Okay. Something to aspire to then. That's our science reporter, Aylin Woodward. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's it for today's Tech News Briefing. But a quick note on AI before we close the show. We want to hear your questions about generative artificial intelligence, AI programs like ChatGPT, Microsoft's new Bing search, or Midjourney, and we're going to answer them on an upcoming episode. Do you want to know more about how these AI programs work, what they're capable of, or maybe what this latest wave of AI development could mean for how we live our lives? Leave us a voice recording with your AI question at tnb@wsj.com, or leave us a voicemail on 415-439-6482. We look forward to hearing from you. TNB's producer is Julie Chang. We had production assistance from Zoe Culkin. Our supervising producer is Melanie Roy, and our executive producer is Chris Sinsley. I'm your host, Zoe Thomas. Thanks for listening, and have a great weekend.